Here at Stringjoy, we try to be pretty gauge agnostic when it comes to guitar strings. We like 8s, we like 9s, we like 13s, we even like 17s. At the end of the day, all we really care about is that you are playing a set of strings that works perfectly for how you play the guitar. That said, in the past we've done a lot of videos defending extra light strings, super light strings, so 8s, 9s, or 10s, or 11s on an acoustic, and it seemed like it was probably about time to give heavy gauge strings the exact same treatment. So today we're talking about the top advantages of heavy gauge guitar strings, in our book anyway. So first up, and probably the most talked about, is better tuning stability. It's not too out of a concept, really. When you tune a guitar, you probably want it to stay tuned where it is. Nobody likes spending time tuning their strings instead of playing their strings. Playing is why you probably have a guitar, so the more time you're spent fiddling with knobs and things and not playing it is time that you'd rather have back. So generally speaking, if all other factors are the same in terms of how the strings are made, how they were stored, how long they've been on your guitar, how heavily they've been played, all that sort of stuff, heavier gauge strings are going to hold their tune a little bit better than lighter gauge strings. Heavier wire in general is just kind of stronger, and for a couple reasons that we don't need to dive too deep into right now, that enables it to hold its tune a little bit better when you're bending a heavy string, you're stressing it in a little bit of a different way than you are a really light string, and all those sort of things combine to ensure that a heavier gauge set of guitar strings pretty much holds its tune quite a bit better than a lighter gauge set of guitar strings. The next best thing about heavy gauge guitar strings is that in general you get more output. Again, all sort of other things being the same, you're using the same wrap alloy, same company making the strings, same process used, all that sort of stuff. A heavier gauge set of guitar strings is going to have a little bit more output than a lighter gauge set of guitar strings. And who doesn't really like being louder? On electric instruments, the magnetic field of your pickups is going to be displaced and engaged more by heavier mass or higher mass guitar strings, and that's going to lead to more output when you plug your guitar into an amplifier. Even on acoustic guitars, when you have heavier gauge strings, that's going to drive the top more, which is going to lead to more output in the room when you're playing your acoustic instrument. So pretty much regardless of whether you're looking at an electric or an acoustic guitar, you're going to get more output out of your guitar, whether that's acoustically or through an amp. The next best thing about heavy gauge guitar strings is that you get more tension. Now, a lot of guitar players see tension as something that is to be avoided. And if you're trying to do two-step bends and not break all of your knuckles, it is. But there are other advantages of high tension as well, such as having pitch stability when you fret a string. With really, really thin guitar strings, you can end up kind of pulling things sharp when you fret a string a little bit too hard, especially if you have like jumbo frets or something like that. Whereas when you have heavier gauge guitar strings, that resistance in the string stops you from fretting it down too hard and going sharp when you fret it. This especially comes into play for slide players, so that's the reason that a lot of players that work with us, such as like Reverend Peyton or Ariel Posen or Joey Landreth, use really, really heavy guitar strings, things like 14s or 17s or 19s, because when you're using like a glass or metal or ceramic slide or whatever, and going over the frets even with higher action, if you have low tension on your strings, it becomes really, really easy to kind of push those strings down with the weight of the slide. You end up knocking a fret or creating buzz, all that sort of bad stuff. So especially for slide, having really high tension helps to kind of fight against that slide and keep everything sounding really clean and good, and soulful and rich and all those other good adjectives that you like about slide. Another big advantage that I don't think gets talked about quite enough is that you end up getting faster and better attack out of your guitar when you have heavier gauge guitar strings. When you have thinner strings, the sort of rebound that it takes for a string to stop resonating and come back to where your pick is going to be a little bit longer than when you have strings at a higher tension, which is, something that happens when you have heavier gauge guitar strings. So if you're playing metal or really any sort of thing that you want to pick really, really fast and be able to trill really easily, heavier gauge strings are going to make that process a lot easier on you. I do think this should get talked about a little bit more. I think everyone thinks that metal players and people that play really hard rock and those sorts of styles play heavy gauge strings just because of the output or because they're tuning down or something like that. But the attack is really kind of the root cause there. If you tune down to drop C and you're using a 46 on the bottom, you're going to have almost no attack. And for, chugga-chugga styles of music or gent, things like that, you really need a lot of fast attack so that you can play really fast and have more complex rhythmic structures where your strings aren't just sort of slopping around like a wet noodle. Now, if you're playing an acoustic guitar, there's actually a whole other sort of angle to this that we touched on a little bit earlier. but I think kind of deserves its own brief little mention, which is that because of the physics of how acoustic guitars are made, you need a certain amount of tension on your strings in order to drive the top and get the proper resonance out of the guitar. When you take something like 9s or 8s or something like that and put them on an acoustic, you don't end up with enough tension to drive the top of the guitar, and you don't end up with a nice full sound. I have people every so often that'll write in and say like, hey, I'm putting 9s on my acoustic, but I'm not getting any bass. It's like, well, you know, there's not a whole lot of bass in 9s to begin with, and so that's why you're not getting it on your acoustic guitar. So just know in general with acoustics, you really want something like 11s or 12s or 13s. I'd say kind of at least 11s in order to get the proper resonance out of the guitar and get it to do what it should be doing. So that's part of the reason why for acoustics you see things like extra lights are actually 10s rather than 8s, or super lights or 11s instead of 9s, lights are 12s instead of 10s. All that sort of same story is because you need that additional tension on an acoustic guitar, whereas you don't really need it on an electric guitar. Now, of course, we all know the real reason to play heavy gauge guitar strings is bragging rights. Would anybody talk about Stevie Ray Vaughan's guitar playing if he played 9s? They definitely would. Stevie Ray's one of the best players ever, whether he played 13s or 9s. I'm just kidding, I promise. But you know that guy. Maybe you played in a band with him, maybe you just know him around. Guy who plays 12s, and he tells you just because you play 9s or 10s that you're somehow less of a guitarist than he is because he plays heavier gauge strings. That's stupid, and that's part of what I'm making this sort of video and our other video about super light guitar strings to sort of explicate, is that, you know, there's no gauge of strings that is better or worse. There's no gauge of strings that's necessarily better for a particular guitar, with certain exceptions. In general, string gauges are all about finding a set of strings that's going to react and play the way that you want it to. Whether it's that you want the attack from a heavier gauge set of guitar strings, or you want the flexibility of a lighter gauge set of strings, or you want more of the output of a heavier gauge set of strings, whatever it is, it's kind of up to you as a player to find that sort of mix of string gauges that's going to work best for you. So whether you like playing 7s or you like playing 17s, we here at Stringjoy support your right to be you and be individual. If you have any questions about what sort of gauges you think you should be playing, maybe you want to try a set that's a little bit heavier than what you're using right now, maybe you want to go lighter, maybe you want to go to like an 11.5 or a 9.5 or something weird like that. Whatever it is, we are here with you and we're happy to help any way we can. Just shoot us a message at support@stringjoy.com. We'll be happy to advise you on any gauge-specific questions or general tone geekery or other gear nerdery that you have out there.